Hi, I'm Metta Spencer, and today I get to talk to a friend who's just got back from Madrid. And what I hear was a pretty disastrous meeting. So maybe he can straighten us out and tell us that it really wasn't all that bad. But anyway, this friend is Paul Beckwith, and he is in Ottawa, I presume, and I'm in Toronto. And what was it, about a week ago that the COP meeting ended in Madrid? Okay, so you're back home, and I want a briefing on what in the world went wrong. Hi, Paul.
Hi. Well, um, it's sort of like a formula for these COPs. The negotiations are supposed to be, it's supposed to be a 2 week process. So it started December 2nd this year, Monday, December 2nd. It was supposed to end Friday the 13th. But almost invariably, what we hear about the negotiations, they tend to go extremely slowly the first week. And it's just between policymakers. There's not ministers of countries. There's no leaders of countries. And then in the second week, some of the ministers arrive, and they have a bit more weight than the policy negotiators. So they talk more, and then usually not too much happens until towards the last few days. On the Thursday, Friday, that's when the bulk of the negotiations are supposed to be decided. But usually, at least the last number of years, they haven't come to any final agreement by Friday when the conference is supposed to end. So they go into overtime and they go to the Saturday, and usually around midnight or so on Saturday, they come up with some amazing breakthrough and the negotiations end. But even that didn't happen this year. So they continued through until Sunday, and I think it's the record length of negotiations. And one of the issues that I've heard is that some of the countries, some of the developing countries, their people have already left on the late Friday or on the Saturday, and they miss the end of the negotiations. And it's kind of like it's kind of a ridiculous process. I mean, what really happened in the first week? What really happened in most of the second week? Even being at the conference, most of the negotiation rooms are closed to the public, and they're closed to the public. They're closed to people that are inside the COP itself. So to get into the COP, there's usually two zones. There's a so-called green zone, which is open to the public, and there's a blue zone, which is open only to people that get badges. And you get badges through an NGO, a non-governmental organization, or who sends you as a representative of them. So it's difficult to get the badges, but once you get the badges and you're still not allowed to go to the closed sessions of negotiation, which most of them are closed. So we hear about what's going on with the negotiations the same as anybody else around the world does, from news reports, from the website for the UN, from the website for the conference. So basically, they couldn't come to an agreement. There are countries like the US and China and India, and I heard Australia that actually tried to actively block, any decent negotiation. Also, I think what made it a bit difficult is it was supposed to be in Chile, Santiago, Chile, as you know, and thankfully the Spanish government took over the conference and organized it. They did a great job, by the way, of getting things running, with less than a month of heads up time. But it meant that the chief it meant that it was still being run or directed supposedly by Chile, with Spain as a host country. They've done this in some other years. Like one year, the Pacific Islands were running the conference, but it was held in another country. I think that one was in Bonn, for example. The German government took it over and said that we'll hold a conference, and for the Pacific Islands, Fiji, and other countries. So I think that when the host country is different from the country with the clout to get things going, that can also add some difficulties to the negotiation. So when the Chilean government came with the what was generally agreed by the different countries, they had, instead of starting, at a high level with all of the requests that not everybody agreed to and try to work those in, they started at sort of the lowest common denominator, which countries had agreed to, but none of the NGOs or scientists or anybody else were happy with, because there was just not enough teeth. And the whole idea is to build on the Paris conference, the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, to build on those and to get stronger commitment from countries, and to also get some sort of idea as to how, if Paris was 2015, what have they done in the intervening 4 years towards meeting their targets? If they have a 10-year target, are they halfway there or 40% of the way there, as one would expect, if they're on track. So there was that sort of thing. And like usual, they got caught up in commas and types of wording and things like that in the mundane details of international negotiations without getting much progress. And then they cast things off and say, well, we'll have to resolve these things that we couldn't resolve at the next COP, in Glasgow, I guess, in the COP 26.
Glasgow?
Yeah, the next year's. The 2020 COP will be in November, I believe, in Scotland.
Okay. Well, I've never been to one, and therefore I don't really quite know how the structure works. Maybe the basic structure you can explain to me. I presume that now it's every year there's a meeting, and every country sends, or I guess every signatory country,
yes,
sends one or several delegates.
Yes.
Or a team of people.
A team of people, yeah. Well, to give you an idea, yeah, some countries send an army of people. To give you an idea, I believe that in Paris, so right after we elected the Trudeau government in 2015, right, the Paris conference was weeks later, and I believe that Canada sent 132 people. Can you believe that? Like, it's insane.
I don't believe anything, because I really didn't know. And whether if just one, I wouldn't have been surprised.
Yeah, it was one of the most. They sent more people than just about any other country.
Really?
That year, everybody wanted a free for all, new government, and yeah, it's absurd. The whole process is really absurd.
How many would you say the average country sends?
Good question. I'm not sure how many delegates there are, but this COP was. I heard 10 to 15,000 people attended this. So that would be comprised of delegates from 190 countries. That would be comprised of NGOs that submitted to get people in. That would be, local people who were able to get badges for NGOs and stuff. Now that's considered a fairly, those numbers are probably smaller than the conference would have been had it stayed in Santiago, and there not being the unrest. I mean, the unrest would have certainly turned a number of people away that were originally planning on going, and then, the unrest. So without the unrest, it would have been a larger COP. But because it was moved to Madrid sort of with only a month or so notice, it may have been a bit smaller, although you may have had more Europeans going. So maybe it balanced out. But I mean, the Paris COP was maybe 25,000 people. And this is in contrast to, it's interesting, the American Geophysical Union had a conference which ran the second week that the COP was on in San Francisco. And there were I heard that there were 28,000 people at that science conference, mostly scientists, earth scientists, so there was a lot of papers, a lot of new talks and discussions on the climate system breakdown. And I'll be doing a number of videos on some of the top results that came out of that science conference in terms of jet stream, Arctic. I mean, the Arctic report card came out also. So there's a lot of climate reports that come out that are timed to come out during the proceedings of the COP, which stands for Conference of Parties. So I say, 25 COPs and squat, in terms of results. I mean, the big metric that is important, of course, is the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, specifically the CO2 levels, which are still rising at ever increasing rates. So as long as those curves continue to rise up at ever increasing rates. The climate conferences up to now have been completely ineffectual and impotent and not able to stop, not able to address any of this crisis.
Of just how the decisions are made. Does each country have one vote, and the team itself has to come to a decision of how to vote collectively, and then they place their vote? Or how does the decision making work?
Yeah, I think it's completely flawed. I think each country is supposed to be given, a say, whether it's equal weight or whether it's weighted by, population in the country. I'm not sure all of the ins and outs. I think they each get a say at the table. But I think one of the biggest flaws in the UN process is if you get, they're looking for unanimous results, and if they don't get unanimous results, then they change the language in the document and so on. So clearly,
it's consensus decision making then. One person veto it.
Yeah, that's what I believe, and that's absurd. That's an absurd system. You can have just one country hell bent on taking down the rest of the world, and right. They can derail the process. It's absurd. Whoever came up with that idea. I mean, obviously the whole COP process is flawed. So there's a big disconnect between the people there, attending the conference, and the NGOs, the people, the young students. There were lots of them because Greta was there, and she was treated like a rock star there, basically. When Greta appeared in the venue was like an airport-sized hangar, if you like just a massive convention center, 9 or 10 massive cavernous rooms, all connected, and lots of security outside, lots of NGO exhibitors and different countries having booths with lots of information about climate. One thing I noticed at this COP is the term climate emergency was everywhere. In fact, on the metro, when you take the subway system to the venue and you get off and you walk through the metro station, there were all these signs everywhere about, we're in a climate emergency. Miami's flooding. This is a climate emergency, not climate change. 75% of Spain is turning into desert. This is a climate emergency, not climate change. And on the escalators, tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. There's more of a sense of urgency among the people that were observers and press and people that were monitoring the proceedings, but that sense of urgency didn't seem to get to the delegates.
It's exactly consistent with everything that I have the impression of here, is that the countries are acting. Well, for one thing, you talk about the consensus decision making. Well, a lot of UN actions are being impeded by that. If the chair had more clout in some sense, do you think because of being kind of a foreigner in Spain, that the person didn't quite have the strength to be able to push people hard enough? Or would that make a difference?
I think it does make a big difference. I think, whoever's in charge and pushing the proceedings has a big impact. And I think we saw that at the Paris COP, because we had the president of France there, right? And he was telling the negotiators, look, you guys, this is not acceptable, what you've come up with so far. Needs to be, you've got another couple of days of negotiations and you'll be here, and we need something that's commensurate with the problem that we're facing. So they really pushed it hard. And I think, having a chair from Chile, when the conference is in Madrid, I don't even know what world leaders attended, in the last few days. I remember in COP, there was like Trudeau flew in, and, lots of world leaders that were there. The president of France, president of many other countries. And I don't know of any world leaders that went in this time. Right. And they go, when the world leaders fly in the last couple of days, and their top ministers and so on, because the policymaker negotiators haven't done their jobs properly or didn't have the power or clout to make definitive statements. It really throws into question the whole structure of the entire conference. What's the point of a 2-week conference? They should shorten it to just a few days.
Okay, but distinguish between the decision-making officials of governance and people like you, who presumably have some desire to go and see what you can find out that other people are doing.
Yes.
I don't know how useful that is. I haven't even tried it, So.
Yeah, well, I mean, personally for me, I would have to say I had a very successful conference personally. I mean, the results for the world, the negotiations were, an utter failure. But personally, I got to meet a lot of people. I got to network with a number of scientists who I've been working with for years, but have never met them in person. For example, Peter Carter from the Climate Emergency Institute. He's a retired medical doctor living in Vancouver who's devoted sort of probably the last decade to the climate crisis. Has great slides. I did a number of press conference presentations with Peter Carter. Peter Wadhams, who I've worked with for many years, one of the co-founders of the Arctic Methane Emergency Group. He's one of Britain's, the UK's top scientists, expert in the Arctic. It's been on 30 or 40 expeditions to the Arctic, many in submarines, measuring the ice thickness from below. He's from Cambridge. His office is across the hall from Stephen Hawking's office, which is still being kept pristine after his death. It's like everything's where it was the day he died. They'll keep it as a museum sort of thing, like they did with Einstein's office. People like Peter Fiakowski, who's set up the Climate Restoration Foundation to look at how to restore climate to the climate that our parents and grandparents enjoyed when they were children. The idea of restoration, climate restoration, and restoration should be we'll be hearing a lot more about it. I'll be working in that area quite a bit with Peter and so on. But I mean, everybody's heard about adaptation and about mitigation, but restoration will be the third prong that will become the really important one.
NET, negative emissions technologies. That's what I hear about it. And I think that to me is the fascinating thing. And as far as I know, I believe that it's been several years since the IPCC said, you got to do that too. It's not enough to just curtail emissions.
Well, they implicitly assume it for their low emission scenarios, like they have these RCP scenarios, representative concentration pathway. So they're RCP 2.6, which is the most favorable scenario. We're on our RCP 8.5, business as usual, which is catastrophic. A number of years, the IPCC has assumed that we need to remove carbon from the atmosphere, but they don't like to say it explicitly. Right?
Why not? I think people say, well, if we told people that, they'd say, well, okay, then we can go on emitting because we'll make it up in other ways.
Yeah.
Your reasoning?
Perhaps there's some of that, but what they don't say is, those two things. I mean, slashing fossil fuel emissions and carbon dioxide removal technologies are absolutely vital, but we also need to deploy solar radiation management techniques to cool the Arctic, for example, because when we lose Arctic sea ice, our world is going to be quite different. The extreme weather events are going to increase greatly in frequency, severity, and duration. Not only will the jet stream slow down and become even more wavier and stuck, giving these extreme weather events, but the actual location of the jet stream will significantly shift, because right now it rotates about the center of cold in the Arctic, and the center of cold in the Arctic, which comprises of Greenland and the sea ice, is near the North Pole, offset towards Greenland a bit. But In a world with no sea ice in the Arctic, the center of cold will be Greenland, and the center of Greenland is at 73 degrees north latitude, which is 17 degrees south of the North Pole, offset from the North Pole. So clearly, logically, the jet streams will rotate about the center of cold, which is the center of Greenland. So they will be offset significantly from where they're located now. They'll be going much lower over North America, for example. And that will greatly impede our ability to grow food in the world. So food prices will significantly rise, and that brings people out onto the streets, lack of food. That's the biggest impact that we'll see in the short term, assuming the sea ice is gone in the short term, within a decade or so.
Okay.
Five years even.
Let me see if I understand how decision making gets done. Once you've got a decision, of course, it has to be a consensus. So basically, you didn't have a consensus, and therefore was no report.
Right.
Now, presumably, the outcome of a COP meeting would be a report of what people agreed to.
Yes. And a statement. Yes.
Now, how does that connect with the reports of the IPCC scientists that are every so often they give a new, projection going on?
Yeah, it's like two different worlds. By the way, there is a report of the outcome of COP25. It's just they're not really publicizing it or advertising it per se, but there has to be a report on the UN website and on the conference website somewhere, might be hard to find, of the text of what was agreed upon by all of the countries. And nobody's happy with it. None of the NGOs are happy with it. And it's completely at odds with what the scientists are saying in the latest report.
Mm-hmm.
The report comparing 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. The report that made all the big news, that basically we have 12 years or 11 years to address climate change, but that report came out, in late 2018. So we've already lost, year and a half or whatever. So people are saying we've got 10 years. And, I and many other people I and many other scientists argue that that's, it's ridiculous to think that we've got 10 years. We have no time. The clock is, we have to try to dig ourselves out of the hole we put ourselves in now.
Mm-hmm.
We're already well into the hole already. There's no time to waste. We have a global climate emergency, and we have to take appropriate action.
Well, about every week, and maybe almost today twice already, I get on the internet a message about some new discovery of somebody who's done something that sounds like the breakthrough to end all breakthroughs. They're going to make fuel straight out of CO2 without through any organic processes. Or all of this stuff sounds just magical and wonderful. But of course, we know that can't happen right away, if ever. It is all just a new discovery, but it's very far from being the stage of being able to implement it. Now, the question to me is, has anybody looked at what is feasible in terms of the quickest things? Because if we have very little time, we have to concentrate on the things that we can do now.
Yes.
And are they prioritizing? Is anybody prioritizing in terms of what can be done fastest?
When many countries and cities and places are saying we're in a climate emergency, but it's double speak. I mean, they're talking out of one side of their mouth and buying a pipeline the very next day, for example, not to mention, which country did that. They're clearly not serious about it, but when they get serious about it, then we will have no choice but to deploy solar radiation management technologies to cool the planet quickly. I'm talking about injecting sulfur into the stratosphere or something equivalent to sulfur to block some of the sunlight, a very small fraction to cool the planet. I'm talking about restoration of Arctic sea ice through various techniques. I'm talking about vast projects to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. And the best ones that can be done the quickest, in my view, are phytoplankton stimulation in the oceans. We can stimulate phytoplankton blooms in the oceans that are mostly devoid of life. And those will draw down huge amounts of CO2 from the atmosphere very quickly. People have talked about planting 2 trillion trees. If we all got, countries got together and said, okay, let's plant 2 trillion trees. Let's do it as quickly as we can and divvy it up. Look at the forests around the world. Where are we going to plant them? Because it's important where you plant them. You don't want to plant them up in the Arctic, right? You'll make the Arctic a darker place, with the trees. I mean, the snow that falls will fall off the trees quickly. The Arctic will be a darker place. You have to worry about the albedo effects. But that's, people talk about that and they ignore the oceans. But the oceans are 71% of the surface area of our planet. And we know that we can stimulate phytoplankton blooms. It's been done. Iron is the weak link in the growth of phytoplankton in the ocean. Naturally, it goes into the oceans from dust, from the Sahara, for example, and we can fertilize vast regions of the when I say vast regions, if we fertilize maybe 1% of the ocean surface in the correct regions, we could draw down huge amounts of CO2 very, very quickly. So we need to do these things, whether people like the idea or not. The consequences of abrupt climate change and extreme weather events that we're getting are putting enormous risks and stresses on society and threatening the very survival of human civilization. And, when people talk about, well, it's too risky to stimulate phytoplankton or too risky to block a little bit of the sunlight, those people will never weigh the risks of what's happening right now and and how it will worsen greatly as we continue to lose Arctic sea ice and snow cover, and can further disrupt the circulation systems of the way heat is distributed around the planet, both in the atmospheric winds and the ocean currents.
Well, I've heard you said this before, and I want to hear exactly more in a second, but I'm still hung up on the question of how much international cooperation can there be, who's at fault, and what can we do to get more, because I think it's the interesting thing to me is it possible to make these changes even if governments refuse to go along with it? If for example, there's
yes.
a consensus system and somebody blocks it, like Trump, or does
yes, it is completely possible.
As I heard, the last COP meeting was a year ago. It was Bolsonaro, wasn't it? They were going to have the next meeting in Brazil, and that was about the time he got elected. And he just made all kinds of trouble and said he wouldn't hold it and refused to cooperate. And they thought he was Brazil was going to be the leading country. And that went south. And then they went to Chile, and then Chile could do it. So who's making trouble this year? What are the countries that are most at fault in terms of really blocking progress?
Yeah, well, clearly it's the U.S., the U.S. and Russia. China and India a bit less so, and countries like Brazil, of course, are, they're completely destroying the huge carbon sink that's the Amazon rainforest. Also, Australia, Australia is enduring horrible wildfires surrounding Sydney. It's absolutely insane and crazy and unhealthy for millions of people, and their government are complete numbskulls and total idiots, and disrupting climate talks. A lot of these people, they're Neanderthals. They can't understand the reality. They never look out the window. They're so ideologically driven that they just ignore all of the facts. And
that I don't even want to go into this conversation, but in the back of my mind, it is.
I mean, look in Canada. Look at the Alberta government in Canada. They have a propaganda room being funded $35 million a year. Funded by oil companies. I mean, these people are insane, and they have to be told that they're insane.
And why? I think the system is not working. Democracy is broken.
Absolutely. Because
you get corporate Brexit going. You've got Bolsonaro. You've got Modi now doing things in India. You've got all of right-wing fascist types, and
Yes.
but they get elected. And that's what I don't understand. What is the matter that democracy is producing people like that? It's not.
Well, you have to be careful because you know, as time goes on, we see that democracy is being hijacked more and more by online bots and by social media and by misinformation and lies and truth. And this stuff is targeted to individual places. This is literally targeted to individual people. And it's not, you know, once it happens successfully in one country, say to get the Brexit vote through, it can happen in another country using the same techniques to get Trump elected. And it can happen, you know, to get Ford in place and to get Bolsonaro in place. And it's like evil spreading around the planet.
I wish I could say, yes, it's these bad guys who are doing it to us, but it's worse than that. It's
I know.
People are deliberately stupid and do not want to smarten up and vote for the things that have to be done for their own interests. They simply don't even know what's in there for their own good.
No, they don't know what's for their own good because they live on social media and they fall prey to these this propaganda, which is the best propaganda money can buy.
I'm not sure, Paul, that that's the explanation. I think it's maybe
it's part of the explanation.
Maybe.
It's part of it, and I'm saying it's quite a big part of it.
All right, I can't dispute it, but I can't.
Yeah.
I can't. You know, I just think I'm desperate trying to think of. I've always believed in democracy, like I believe in, you know, apple pie and motherhood.
Yeah, but I mean, democracy is it's big. I mean, look at the Canadian. We call it Canadian democracy. You know, look at the number of lobbyists that went to see McKenna when she was environment minister, say in you know, the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll have of 100 lobbyists, you might get 3 or 4 from NGOs. And you the other 95 or 96 will be from corporations, right? And you know, a constant stream of, you know, and I don't know whether they get them every day or a couple a week. You know, these people just chip away at, and you know, the very fact that you're allowing them to come in and to sway is you know, is disrupting democracy. It's corporations. It's not individuals. They're representing the corporate interest.
I don't know.
You just need to look at the stat, and it's even worse in the U.S. because they have these big because the money in politics is much greater than it is. At least in Canada, we have some regulations about money in politics. You know, we don't have these super PACs and things.
Well, listen, it isn't just that that Facebook and Twitter and stuff will let people post any kind of junk they want. The truth is they've cracked down to even the extent that you and I will maybe not be able, probably, almost certainly not be able to advertise this or even disseminate this video on my website. I mean, not my website, but Facebook page. They won't let me do it. That's true everywhere. They've cut down so that it's a real infringement of freedom of speech. So there's as much being done to harm the state of knowledge in the society by refusing to allow people to discuss things as there is from allowing pseudo-Nazis or trolls in St. Petersburg River. I don't know. I shouldn't have brought us to this part of the conversation, because I know what we really want to talk about is I mean, you've been clearly making it obvious that you think plankton are the way to go, and we haven't had that talk yet. I want to know, you think that it would be possible to seed the oceans with iron quick enough to make a big difference in the plankton? Okay, tell me about it. How's that going to work, and who's going to do it, and what do we have to do to get it to work? And also,
it works. It's already been done.
I know it's been done, but they said that it didn't work completely because of something. Somebody did it off the West Coast. And,
West George in 2012.
What went wrong there?
What went wrong there is it worked so well that the blooms could be seen from space. It stimulated marine growth. the salmon runs expected off Vancouver, instead of they went up at least 10 or 20 fold. There were record runs of salmon for 3 years running off Vancouver. The Canadian government went in and they confiscated all the computers and all the records and all the information from the company that did it. Illegally, I should mention, because the company that did it, which was headed by Russ George, had all of the proper permits, and he had the go-ahead from the Haida Gwaii off Vancouver, and he had the funding in place, and he followed all of the rules and regulations, and the government just decided to step in, and they sent in like literally SWAT teams at night and shut them and took everything, took all the records, took everything, and then started to make claims that it didn't work, et cetera, et cetera. It's okay, absurd. You tell me why that happened. Anybody can investigate the facts of what happened. And clearly it worked. It worked wonders. So, and it should work wonders. I mean, many parts of the ocean are high nutrient, low iron. Okay, so in order for phytoplankton to proliferate, they need sunlight. That's why they're at the surface. They need water. There's plenty of that in the ocean. They need nutrients, and they get the nutrients from down below, generally from upwelling. But in many parts of the ocean, there are decent nutrients at the surface, but there's no iron. The iron normally comes in from dust that's windblown. We know that the circulation patterns of the atmosphere, the jet streams, are changing. We know that the ocean currents are changing. As the circulation patterns of the atmosphere change, and dust is not reaching regions where it used to reach, so there's an iron deficiency, and the phytoplankton cannot grow. When the phytoplankton are stimulated and proliferate, then the zooplankton eat them, and small fish and big fish, and you can get a cascade up the entire food chain, which sucks enormous amounts of carbon out of the ocean. All we're talking about is trying to restore the ocean to a healthy state. We all know that the ocean is acidifying. We know that because of the warming of the ocean, that it's stratifying. Warm water floats on top of cold water. So the ocean is becoming more stratified, more layered. So therefore, the nutrients that used to come up from a couple hundred meters down are no longer getting to the surface, stimulating these phytoplankton blooms, because we've changed the physical properties of the ocean. The heating of the oceans is causing more and more layering and stratification, and a great reduction of phytoplankton growth. We know that we've killed off over 90% of the large fish in the ocean. We know that the biomass of plants and animals on the earth is taking a huge hit, right? We're getting more and more extinctions. We're basically, I don't know if you realize that the most common bird on the entire planet by a long shot is the chicken. Okay, if you take the biomass of all the birds that live on the earth, they're a fraction of the biomass of chickens, from our mass industrial chicken farms. Mm-hmm. If you take, we're converting the animal biomass on the surface of the earth to basically to humans and to cattle and to chickens and things like that, at the expense of all other species. It's almost like, think of the worst things, the most stupid things that one could do in order to destroy all life on this planet, and that's what we're doing full speed ahead at the moment. Okay, so I'm talking about restoring a healthy ocean with the phytoplankton.
And the whole trick consists of spreading around little granules of powdered iron on the surface of the ocean.
Yeah, just like nanograms even. The amount that like 2 kilograms over 100 square kilometers would do wonders. It's such minuscule amounts that are normally carried by the winds, but we can, all we're doing is enhancing processes that happen naturally, right? That's what we'd be doing by planting 2 trillion trees. And, people argue that, we can cut down the larger trees and then grind them up and then use the wood in bioenergy carbon capture and storage techniques and stuff. But I mean, large trees capture way more carbon than small trees, obviously, right? Large trees that are huge diameters and very tall, you know, their biomass growth in a year is going to far exceed that of any small tree, right? Not as a percentage, but as an actual physical mass.
But as a percentage, that's not true.
Pardon
Percentage,
me?
yeah, but younger trees are more active on doing it, but they're
Well, younger trees can you know, you need a huge increased quantity of younger trees,
yeah.
right? It's a total mass of carbon inside the trees, and obviously, you know, a larger tree, you know, a redwood tree that grows, you know, 20 meters in a year and expands its girth, you know, a millimeter or something, is going to capture way more carbon, you know, and it's in that volume of growth than any smaller tree will, right? But if you have gazillions of smaller trees, then you can figure out how many you would need in order to capture it. So the but anyway, people, you know, we're landlubbers, so we talk about planting 2 trillion trees, and yet we completely ignore the much greater quantities of carbon that could be captured by plankton, you know, in the oceans, right?
We talked a bit about this in the last conversation we had on my series, and there was a guy who replied on YouTube and said something had gone wrong with that experiment that we mentioned on the West Coast in the ocean, Pacific Ocean, and that and you replied and said, well, the answer to that is to only put the iron in very deep areas of the ocean.
Yeah.
Remind me what it was that he objected to that said had gone wrong with that.
Well, I think we're all aware that in the Gulf of Mexico, each spring, or when farmers are fertilizing their fields with nitrogen, and that gets into the Mississippi, and then parts of that's carried into the Gulf of Mexico, then it stimulates phytoplankton blooms in the shallow water at the river mouth,
Mm-hmm.
at the river exits into the ocean, and those phytoplankton sink to the bottom. They're broken down by bacteria, using up all the oxygen in the water at the bottom, you know, and it's not very deep, and causing, you know, huge dead zones in the ocean, you know, just off of the river. And of course, we don't want dead zones. So, you know, we don't do this in shallow water. We do this in deep ocean water.
Oh,
There's no oxygen at the bottom of deep ocean water, right? There's very little oxygen on the seafloor, you know, in deep water. I mean, there's no way for it to get down there. So when the phytoplankton are blooming, then they can be eaten by zooplankton, etc. Usually it's not the phytoplankton carcasses that make it to the ocean floor. Usually they're eaten by zooplankton, you know, smaller fish, bigger fish, and it's the excrement from these other organs that concentrates the organic matter, you know, making it higher density, and that sinks to the ocean floor very quickly. And then it gets in the sediments, and that's how the carbon builds up into the sediments and is taken out of the ocean atmosphere system, which is what we need to do.
Okay, what are the other downsides? The downside might be, one is if you don't do it right, you might deplete the ocean or an area of the ocean of oxygen and make a dead zone.
Only if you don't get dead zones in deep water.
Okay.
Dead zones are a shallow continental shelf type phenomena.
I wasn't aware that the Gulf of Mexico is a shallow thing. It is, huh?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Think of the Baltic Sea as a classic case of huge dead zones on the seafloor there. Okay.
Baltic Sea. They have.
Well, there's not a lot of water mixing, right? It's kind of enclosed, and it's difficult for the water to get out and mix. Okay, so you know, dead zones. You know, there's about 170 regions where there were dead zones. It's gone to 300 recently, mostly associated with runoff of fertilizers from land. Okay, when we talk about deep oceans, there's very little oxygen at the bottom, but we don't call it a dead zone at the bottom of deep ocean. I mean, the bottom of most deep oceans are low in oxygen, but we don't call them dead zones.
Okay, now let's
the way they've always been. So you know, it's pretty straightforward. I mean,
okay,
you know, it's really straightforward.
Let's assume that you've won me over. I'm still, I don't know enough to have an opinion really, but let's assume that that I am now enthusiastically
Well,
zealous about putting iron in the oceans.
well, I'm not trying
We're
to
going to do
win you
this.
over. What I'm trying to do is at least perk your interest so that you can go and research this
No,
more and more yourself, and then you can convince yourself that what I'm saying is accurate.
doesn't matter. I'll do that anyway. But
Yeah.
what I want is let's assume that we're on the same page and we're going to try to make this happen. How would we make this happen? Now, what are the obstacles and what are the problems? Because it sounds to me as if you've got a decision, you'd have to have all of the countries of the world at a COP meeting.
Well, see, I don't think it's gonna. Yeah, you mentioned this before. There's about 10 people that have as much money as half the world.
I know.
Okay, so you don't have to win over countries, right? You have to win over some very wealthy people, and then you can spend a few $1 billion to do to vastly seed the oceans with plankton, spend a few $1 billion to put the sulfur into the stratosphere, and that's all you need. Forget about winning over all of these skeptical countries, and then they're all going to come at you and try to shut you down.
That's what I kind of was hoping you would say, that you and I can do it if we just go talk to Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates or somebody, Warren Buffett, and get them to give us a little money, and we'll go out and do it, and nobody will know that we're doing it. We can get away with it. Nobody will find out until it's all done. Is that the general hope? I mean, if frankly, given what we've just said about how difficult it is to get at this point with the technology and the social media having the functions that you say are so important, we're not going to get countries going to Glasgow next year and saying, okay, let's put iron in the oceans, and everybody agree to it. So since that's not going to happen, what's the next best step? Is it possible for somebody with deep pockets to go out and just do it? And what would happen to them? I mean, I hear you say that the Canadian government came and confiscated the records of the guy who tried it off the West Coast. What is the alternative game plan besides going through a COP meeting?
Well, I don't know. I mean, have you ever done a freedom of information request? Because I know, I think that would be an interesting step to, have, I do it myself, but I know Mike D'Souza, and some of the other reporters. He was at Post Media, then now he's at National Observer, the online publication. He's done all kinds of freedom of information requests. I should meet with them and talk to him about doing one for getting all of the Canadian government information on the 2012 iron sulfate seeding off Haida Gwaii, right? And see, it'll probably all be redacted for the most part, but it would be interesting to see, what made them decide to do this and to basically try to cover up, that nothing ever happened there. I'll talk to Russ George about it first. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to be at the COP, but
he's the guy who did it. And you know him?
Yeah.
You do? Okay.
Not personally, but I know him from emails and
he
correspondence
was
and so
a
on.
rich guy who just went out there and did it. But he didn't ask permission, or he did ask?
No. He got all kinds of permission from the Haida Gwaii off Vancouver, from the regulations, the Canadian government. He followed the book on everything, and he's not a rich guy. He got funding from the Haida Gwaii. Basically, he said he could bring all the salmon back, which is exactly what he did. A lot of the plankton seeding, the great thing about it is that it can pay for itself, because you'll get a proliferation. It's not that expensive to do in the first place, and in the second place, it can stimulate enormous marine life growth. So you could sell fishing licenses. You could do it in a specific region of the ocean, and you could sell fishing licenses to people to go to that region and fish, and there'll be a proliferation of fish. So it easily pays for itself. Another thing that can be scalable and capture huge amounts of CO2 out of the atmosphere is is to take the CO2 out of the atmosphere and convert it into limestone. Okay, so this has been done in Iceland. It converts into limestone quite quickly if the conditions are right. So we use vast amounts of limestone to make concrete, and we use to make cement, sorry. I mean, Portland cement is mostly not limestone. And we use vast amounts of cement to make concrete. We mix the cement with rocks and gravel and limestone aggregate. So instead of mining the limestone for the construction industry and mining the rocks and aggregate that we mix with the cement to make concrete, we create those with the CO2 that we capture from the air. Okay, we make them. And then what better way is there to sequester carbon to get it out of the atmosphere ocean system than to do this? And it's scalable, and it will pay for itself in the long run. Mining is a very expensive process. So this is another thing. So we don't need money from governments. What we do is we will create these new areas of business, new areas of commerce. Mm-hmm. And once we get them going and scale them up, then they will pay for themselves. Mm-hmm. And we don't need to rely on fickle governments to do this.
This is weathering of stone. Is that what you're referring to? This taking limestone and exposing it to air, and it captures the CO2 from the air, right?
Yeah, it's a similar thing. I mean, there's different minerals that absorb huge amounts of CO2, like olivine is a good example. It's like a greenish mineral, and it reacts very, very quickly with CO2 in the air to grow the mineral. And if you grind it up into fine powders and dust to greatly increase the surface area of the olivine mineral, then the reaction rate is proportional to the surface area. So it greatly increases. So this is something slightly different. What I'm talking about is direct air capture of CO2. Okay, so there are a dozen startups around the world that are doing direct air capture. One of them—
Not that way. I've heard of the one that David Keith's outfit in.
Yeah, carbon engineering is an example. Yeah. But anyway, there was one in Iceland that captured the CO2 from the air and injected it in underground.
Yes.
And then they measured what was coming out the other end, and they found almost no CO2 was coming out the other end. And where was it going? It was going into forming rock, the limestone rock. And they thought that would take 10 years or 100 years or maybe even 1,000 years, but it happens within a few days, the process. So it's captured very quickly. So we scale this up and we make all of the limestone and all of the rock for the global cement concrete industry, and the scale works, and we sell it to the companies. Instead of them having to mine it, they go and we produce it from captured CO2. So go to Healthy Climate Alliance. Okay. There's a 43-page white paper. Mm-hmm. There's a company in San Francisco called Blue Planet that has actually captured CO2 from the air and made concrete, and that concrete has gone into the runways of San Francisco Airport. Okay, so that process needs to be scaled up like crazy, as does the process of phytoplankton. And those things are scalable and will go a long way to drawing down CO2. And we need to aim for a target. We need to aim to get back to about 300 parts per million in the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. So until that greenhouse gas curve of CO2, which used to rise at about a part per million per year for many years, and then last few decades, before 4 decades ago, rose about 2 parts per million. And now it rises as much as 3 parts per million in bad years, right? So it's rising at an ever increasing rate. We need to flatten that curve, and we need to start dropping that curve. And when we start dropping it, it will give a lot of people on the planet hope that we can actually address the climate crisis. So then that will lead to more and more commercial ventures doing this removal, and we can get back to 300. And, we can do it by 2050 is the goal. So I don't want to reinvent the wheel. This company, the idea of climate restoration should be on everybody's lips. Anybody that's saying we're doomed with climate change and that needs to educate themselves on climate restoration. Climate restoration will become more important, I'm telling you, than the ideas of adaptation and mitigation, which the IPCC writes huge reports on every 5 to 7 years. Entire 2,000-page volume on adaptation, 2,000 pages on mitigation, but nothing about restoration. Absolutely nothing. Like I say, the IPCC at this stage is an impediment to saving our planet.
Whoa, that's heavy language, man.
Why do they never talk about what we can do?
All I know is when I start talking about negative emission technologies, first of all, nobody quite understands what that could be.
Okay, well, first of all, the jargon.
They'll say, don't say that, because people will get the idea that we can take it out of the atmosphere. Therefore, we can go ahead and keep on putting it into the atmosphere.
You know what? Who cares if we keep putting it in the atmosphere if we take it out at twice the rate we put it in?
Because it's
nobody will care anymore about fossil fuel companies putting it in the air if we figure out ways to take it out at double the rate. As long as that CO2 curve starts to drop back to what it used to be, then the idea of the evil fossil fuel company will drop by the wayside. I went to the Saudi Arabia country booth, and I said to them, aren't you guys tired of being the bad guys of climate all the time? Don't you want to be, it's very simple. If you want to become the good guys of climate, the country that saves the world, you put huge amounts of your profits into climate restoration technologies. And I told them exactly what I'm telling you, and I may even go to some conference there and meet with them. The point is how they wouldn't be the evil bad guy pariah if they put in 10 gigatons of CO2 per year, their product, and they take out 20 gigatons per year. Yeah. Lowering global, that's the point. That's the whole point. The only key factor is how much CO2 is in the atmosphere.
Well, yes, the other factor, though, is how much energy it takes to do that, because there's the energy in and energy out equation.
Right. Right. Well, plankton is the energy of, to answer those questions, stimulating phytoplankton blooms, call it biomimicry. You're just enhancing a natural process. It's almost no energy. Ships ply the ocean all the time. Mm-hmm. What if when those ships ply the ocean, they have little iron little compartments in the ships that contain the iron sulfate, and they let out small fractions of it wherever they traverse in the ocean, where it's deemed that it would be useful for stimulating phytoplankton bloom. Right? What if aircraft that were flying, commercial aircraft, what if they flew a little bit higher than they do now to save fuel, and they have some sulfur in their fuels, and they can put some sulfur up into the stratosphere as they're flying to stimulate, to cool the planet a little bit. We just have to be smart about things.
We have to think about all of the bad things that might happen as a result. Because
the bad things is that we're going under right now. The bad thing is that we're destroying all the life on our planet, and we're going under. What can be worse than that?
Well,
the other thing is
worse, I'll tell you, is if in fact the sulfur that we put in the stratosphere actually does blot out enough of the sun so we can't raise the food for the population, that would be worse than not doing it.
Well, when a big volcano goes off, it puts up sulfur. So we know the levels it put up, and we start small and we go up, and if we decide there's too much, then we lower it and it's washed out. It's clear where we get the money from to do this. We get the money from the people that cause the problem, the fossil fuel companies. They want to save their asses. They need to get to take out more CO2 than they put in. We get the money from the military. The military is supposed to protect people. When the enemy is climate change and not another country, we need to take this. The U.S. just approved $738 billion budget for their military this year. So we take that money, and instead of figuring out better ways to kill people, we decide we take all that money and those engineers, those thousands and thousands of engineers at Lockheed Martin and all the other aerospace companies, and we tell them, you've got to take CO2 out of the atmosphere.
Even if we could get rid of Trump, which is very, very questionable, go with the previous suggestion. Let's find somebody with deep pockets who go out there and secretly sprinkle some iron in the ocean, or somebody without telling anybody who will shoot up sulfur into the stratosphere or have planes emit it up there. I mean, I don't think there's a way to get there through using ordinary democratic. For God forgive me for saying this, because I've always been a great believer in democracy, if anybody there ever was, but I really think it's not working, and we're not going to get there through using these methods. We've got to find another way. It's terrible to say that. Terrible. But I really don't think we're going to get there. You say we got 10 years. We don't even. You say we don't.
No, I know we don't have 10 years. I never say we have 10 years.
No.
We don't have any years. We're hanging by our fingernails. We have to try to claw our way back, and we do that by slashing fossil fuel emissions, by carbon dioxide removal, by solar radiation management, and that's it. And
we've done it today.
All of the above.
As much as we're going to get done today.
I've got 4 or 5 videos that I've yet to post that were taken in Madrid, and 3 of them are fascinating. A friend of mine knows a lot of teachers across Europe, and he got different teachers to talk to their kids, all different ages, to ask Paul the climate scientist questions. So there's like 4 and 5-year-olds asking, what medicine can we use for the earth? Right. And there's all kinds of different questions. So I have 3 videos to post on that. The kids are so cute. It's just, it's fantastic stuff. So I'll be posting that in the next few days, I hope.
Super. And let's keep in touch with this.
Okay.
This conversation is one of the weekly series Talk About Saving the World, produced by Peace Magazine and Project Save the World. Please visit our website at tosavetheworld.ca, where you can sign the Platform for Survival, a list of 25 public policy proposals that, if enacted, would greatly reduce the risk of 6 global threats to humankind. Come back next week for another discussion of a serious global issue.